I knew the knife was coming before it hit the table, but I didn't expect him to smile while twisting it. He slid the termination papers across my desk like he was passing me a lunch menu, leaned back in my chair, and said, "Don't get emotional, this is just business." The fluorescent light above us hummed like it was enjoying the show. I kept my hand still, my face neutral, and signed each page with the same steady pen stroke I'd used for 15 years of compliance reports. He didn't need to know that under the calm, my mind was already rifling through drawers he'd never even seen. He thought he was clearing dead wood to streamline operations, like those management blogs love to say. I thought about the last meeting we had, when he waved off my concerns about a missed quarterly control, as if I was warning him about a smudge on his tie. Now here he was, looking almost pleased with himself for pulling the trigger. I just nodded, slid the papers back, and listened to him rattle off the HR script about benefits in Cobra. My mouth stayed polite, but somewhere deep down, a switch flipped. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to slam the door. Loud exits make good theater, but they leave smoke that clears too fast. No, I was going to be air. Invisible, necessary, capable of suffocating the whole room without anyone noticing until it was too late. By the way, 97% of you listening to this right now aren't subscribed. I know, I checked the numbers. Hit that subscribe button. It's a tiny click for you, but it keeps this whole little revenge-fueled storytelling machine running, and believe me, the team loves it when you do. Now, where was I? Oh, right, the part where I started planning. I looked him straight in the eye as he told me IT would be locking my accounts effective immediately. A small flicker of pride ran through me. He thought that was cutting me off. What he didn't know was that most of my important work never lived in the official channels. I had my own systems, my own backups, all by the book, of course. I am nothing if not compliant. But compliant and forgetful are two very different things. As he droned on about my severance package, I remembered each ignored email, every meeting where I'd been told we'll address that later, and the way those laters had piled up like junk mail in a vacant house. My mind walked through the corridors of my own quiet archive, 5 years worth of missed controls, failed audits, unsigned reconciliations, and regulation codes bookmarked with a precision that would make a tax attorney blush. All tagged, all dated, all clean. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and offered his hand like we were parting after a friendly lunch. I took it, firm grip, steady eye contact. I think he mistook my calm for surrender. He wouldn't have recognized calculation if it was stapled to his forehead. I gathered my few personal items, the coffee mug my sister gave me, the notepad with my grocery list, a photo of my niece in her soccer uniform, nothing else. The real valuables didn't fit in a box. Real valuables were lines in a spreadsheet, embedded hyperlinks to regulatory statutes, timestamps that no one could argue with, and they were all sitting where I could reach them if I wanted to. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed the open plan bullpen, where junior analysts were still hunched over their screens. A few glanced up, curious. I gave them the same small smile I'd given at office birthdays when someone handed me a piece of cake I didn't want. It's amazing how many people mistake a smile for peace. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel weighed down by the building's air. Instead, there was a clarity, the kind you get when you realize you've been walking around with a loaded deck and no one else even knows the game's about to start. I wasn't plotting revenge. Not yet. This wasn't about them. It was about the principle I'd lived by my whole career. When someone asks for documentation, you give them exactly what they asked for. No more, no less. And when you've been the only one paying attention for a decade and a half, exactly can be a dangerous word. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, the plan wasn't fully formed. But the edges were there, sharp and promising. The kind of edges that cut clean. 15 years in compliance teaches you two things. First, that people hate bad news even when it's in their best interest. And second, that later is corporate for never. Every job has its unglamorous saints, and mine was being the person who kept the receipts nobody wanted to look at. If a quarterly control failed, I logged it. If someone skipped a reconciliation, I noted the date, time, and the exact clause of the regulation they'd just trampled on. I wasn't a tattletale, I was a historian. And in our line of work, history doesn't repeat, it invoices. The archive started small, a missing sign-off here, a late submission there. At first, I thought it was temporary, a hiccup in a company that just needed a better rhythm. So I kept my little spreadsheet on the side, tucked away on a personal drive, thinking it would help jog memories when the auditors came knocking. But then the hiccups turned into coughs, and the coughs turned into full-on pneumonia. Controls skipped for efficiency. Deadlines shrugged off because the client won't care. And every time I raised a hand, the answer was the same. Not now, we've got bigger fires, one manager said, sipping his coffee like he was talking about the weather. We can circle back, another promised, already swiveling in her chair to take a more urgent call. Then came him, the new boss, imported from some consulting firm, where streamline was code for ignore the rules until you can't anymore. My first meeting with him was a one-on-one, and I'll never forget the way he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and said, "We're here to move fast, not get bogged down in red tape." Financial controls aren't red tape, I replied. They're seatbelts. You don't notice them until you need them. He chuckled as if I'd just told a quaint story about a small town diner. I get it, but you've been here a long time. You're used to the old way. We're building something leaner. Leaner. That was his favorite word. Leaner meetings, leaner reports, leaner oversight. It sounded good in PowerPoint, but in practice it meant my weekly compliance memos went unread, my risk assessment emails unanswered. I could have stopped sending them, but I didn't. I sent every single one, and in the subject line, I started including the date and the regulation number, just for fun. When I say my archive was meticulous, I mean each entry had layers. First, incident itself, Q2 financial reconciliation not completed. Then the exact timestamp down to the minute. Then the regulation it violated with a hyperlink straight to the official statute. And because I couldn't resist, I added a brief summary in plain English in case someone actually decided to read it. Example, failure to perform reconciliation per SOX 404B, equivalent to leaving the vault door open overnight. Dry humor, wrapped in technical accuracy. Sometimes I imagined the auditors finding these one day and laughing at my little asides. Other times, I imagined the executives reading them with the dawning horror of someone realizing the vault had, in fact, been wide open for years. My private log wasn't vindictive. At least not at first. It was insurance. The company's memory was short, mine wasn't. And over the years, it became a kind of diary, one that didn't track feelings, only facts, a living record of every we'll get to it that never came. There were moments, though, when my patience thinned to a razor's edge, like the quarterly review where I pointed out 3 separate violations and my boss waved a hand, saying, "We'll just adjust the language in the report." Adjust the language. As if changing the wording made the problem disappear. Or the day I flagged a missing dual signature authorization, the kind that prevents fraud, and he told me, "You can trust the team, don't be so paranoid." I almost laughed. Trust is a great value in a marriage, a friendship, maybe even a carpool. In finance, trust without verification is just an invitation. So I kept smiling in meetings, taking notes no one else wanted, and tucking each ignored warning into my archive. The longer I stayed, the thicker it grew. Not messy, never messy. It was organized by year, quarter, and control category. Each violation lined up like soldiers in a parade. And here's the thing about building something like that. You don't think about using it. You just think about having it because someday someone will need it. I didn't know when. I didn't know how. But I knew the day would come when all those little entries, those tiny overlooked details, would be more than just my insurance policy. They'd be the one thing nobody could argue with. And that's the beauty of facts. I don't need you to fight for them. They fight all by themselves. The walk from my desk to HR felt shorter than it should have, like my feet knew there was no reason to drag it out. The HR rep was polite in that over-rehearsed way, the kind that says they've done this 100 times but still want you to believe you're different. She slid a small, manila envelope across the table. Inside was the exit packet, a printout of my benefits summary, and a pre-addressed box for returning my laptop. Then came the formality, the badge. I'd worn that badge every day for 15 years. It was more than plastic with my picture on it. It was the key to every hallway, every meeting room, every late-night compliance crunch when the rest of the office had gone dark. Now, it felt light in my hand, almost inconsequential, as I set it on the desk. The HR rep smiled like we'd just finished a friendly board game. From there, it was its turn. My laptop screen dimmed as they remotely disabled my account, and a polite but final email popped up. Access to all corporate systems has been deactivated per termination policy. It was like watching the lights go out in a building you'd lived in for years. I started clearing my inbox of anything personal when a subject line caught my eye: request for all financial control records external audit. Timestamp said it had landed in my inbox less than 10 minutes ago. My mouse hovered over it for a second, and I could feel that flicker of electricity in my chest, the kind you get when a coincidence feels too perfect to actually be one. I opened the email. The auditors were polite and professional, just as they always were, but the request was broad. All relevant financial control documentation for the past 5 fiscal years was the kind of language that most people would interpret loosely, pulling whatever was easy to find and assuming good enough would pass. I knew better. 5 fiscal years, controls, documentation. They had no idea that those 3 words had been the spine of my professional life. My archive didn't just meet their request, it exceeded it in ways they couldn't possibly anticipate. I could already picture their faces when they saw the scope, not just missing reports, but detailed entries with timestamps, violation codes, and regulation hyperlinks. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was an armory. I glanced at the clock. My access window was shrinking fast. IT would pull the plug completely once I shut down the laptop. My first instinct was to wonder if I even should respond. After all, I wasn't obligated anymore. But then I thought about the box of data I'd built over 15 years, the one no one else even knew existed. Request wasn't from my boss or the CFO or anyone whose opinion I cared less about than expired milk. It was from the auditors, and auditors were neutral. They weren't here to protect anyone's ego. They were here for the truth. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth as I flagged the email to follow up before my official sign-off. Outwardly, I kept the same professional tone, polite responses to HR, clear confirmations of my laptop return date. Inside, that flicker of satisfaction was growing warmer. Not vengeful, not yet. Just the steady awareness that the auditors had unknowingly walked into the one place my boss had never dared to look. I shut down the laptop for the last time, knowing exactly what I was going to do before the system booted up again. I reopened the laptop, the corporate logo flashing across the screen like a door I'd been told was locked, but that I still had the key to. The audit request sat there, patient and unassuming, as if it were just another Tuesday task. I clicked reply, then stopped. No, this wasn't something to dash off in a few minutes. This was going to be meticulous, deliberate, surgical. First, I opened my private archive. It wasn't flashy, just a series of folders stacked in perfect chronological order. Year right arrow, quarter right arrow, control category. Inside each, spreadsheet files named with the precision of a serial number. I scrolled to the earliest year in the request window, 5 fiscal years back, and opened the first file. The structure was already built for this kind of moment. Column A, date of incident. Column B, control name. Column C, violation code. Column D, hyperlink to the exact section of the regulation it violated. Column E, source document ID from the company's own internal system, so there was no question about origin. No footnotes, no colorful language, no C attached for my thoughts. This wasn't a manifesto, it was evidence. I copied the first quarter into a fresh master sheet, then the second, and so on. The rhythm was almost meditative: click, copy, paste, confirm link, move on. Each row was a pinprick of memory. The time finance skipped a dual authorization on a 6-figure transfer. The quarter when reconciliations were signed off 3 months late, well past the statutory deadline. Year-end scramble when we realized no one had tested the disaster recovery process because the budget for it had been reallocated to an executive retreat. The beauty of the work was in its sparseness. There was no judgment in the words themselves, just numbers, names, and dates. But to anyone who spoke the language of compliance, the pattern would be deafening. A missed control here or there is an oversight. A sustained, documented history of them, year after year, something else entirely. By the time I reached the most recent quarter, the sheet had grown to hundreds of lines. I stopped for a moment to scan it from top to bottom. The weight of it wasn't just in the length, it was in the consistency. The same types of failures repeating, flagged, and left unresolved. Each entry linked to a law or regulation that wasn't a suggestion, but a requirement. And each of those links connected to consequences that, if anyone took them seriously, land squarely on the shoulders of certain executives. I double-checked the formatting, making sure every date was in the same style, every link functional, every control name spelled exactly as it appeared in the official manuals. If there's one thing that can blunt the edge of truth, it's sloppy presentation. This had to be pristine. While I worked, the clock in the corner of my screen ticked forward, each minute shrinking the window before my account closed for good. I wasn't rushing, though there was a quiet thrill in the precision of it, like tuning an instrument no one knew they'd be hearing in a few hours. I imagined the auditors scrolling through it, their brows furrowing as they realized they weren't looking at a partial snapshot. This was the whole picture, and the picture was ugly. I saved the file with a plain, professional name, financial control documentation 5-year range, and attached it to a draft email. Still no commentary, no explanation, no wink between the lines, just the exact fulfillment of the request down to the letter. All that was left was to press send. I sat back for a moment, letting the cursor hover over the button. This wasn't revenge, not in the Hollywood sense. This was me doing what I'd always done, my job. Only now I had the rare satisfaction of knowing that the precision I'd been mocked for was about to speak louder than any speech I could give. And when it spoke, it wouldn't be to me. It would be to them. I hit send. No drama, no flourish, just the quiet click of the mouse and the whir of the outgoing email leaving my outbox. The file sailed off to its destination, and a few seconds later, my screen pinged with the automatic confirmation, delivery to recipient confirmed. For a moment, I just sat there, watching the timestamp in the corner of the screen. It was done. 15 years of careful record-keeping, pressed into one perfectly ordered document, now sitting in an auditor's inbox waiting to be opened. I imagined the first few minutes after they clicked it, the scrolling, the widening eyes, the mental math of realizing the scale before they even got halfway through. I was halfway through boxing up my last desk items when the reply came in. Short, polite, and telling. Would you be available for a follow-up call to clarify scope? That was fast. Too fast for them to have done more than skim the surface, which meant the surface alone had been enough to make them stop and regroup. That little flicker of satisfaction from earlier started to glow warmer. I typed a professional response, confirming I'd be available that afternoon before my account access ended, and hit send. It wasn't 2 minutes later that my boss appeared in the doorway, holding a printout of the auditor's request like it was a receipt for something he didn't remember buying. They're asking for a follow-up already? he said, frowning. What did you even send them? The documentation they requested, I answered evenly. All relevant financial control records for the past 5 years. His mouth twisted into something between a smirk and a grimace. You don't have to drown them in irrelevant details. They're not going to thank you for wasting their time with whatever you keep in those endless spreadsheets. The irony almost made me laugh. He thought the weight of that file was fluff, as if precision and thoroughness were some kind of bureaucratic indulgence. As if the auditors, whose entire job was detail, would be irritated by getting too much of it. I'm sure they'll decide what's relevant, I said, keeping my voice even. My job was to give them everything that fits their request. He shrugged, clearly satisfied with his own interpretation of events, and walked off with the lazy confidence of a man convinced the world bends to his shortcuts. I watched him go, wondering how long that confidence would last once someone with authority started asking why those irrelevant details matched, line for line, with laws he'd been ignoring. As I turned back to my screen, the meeting invite from the auditors popped up. Subject line, clarification discussion, financial control documentation. They'd set aside an hour. I couldn't help but imagine them trying to compress 5 years of rot into 60 minutes of polite questioning. The clock was ticking, but I didn't mind. I wasn't the one on borrowed time. By the time the afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, the air in the office had shifted. It wasn't loud, no shouting, no slammed doors. But there was a change in the way people moved. Conversations were shorter. Heads stayed closer together. Someone from facilities rolled a cart of bottled water into the large conference room, the one the auditors were using, as if they were settling in for a siege. An email circulated from admin about extended guest access for our external partners. That never happened unless someone important was staying longer than planned. My old compliance senses prickled. Auditors didn't extend a visit unless what they'd found in the first round made them hungry for more. I caught fragments of conversation as I boxed up my things. Need to pull everything from FY19. And where's the signed amendment for legal assistants were darting in and out of offices carrying armfuls of old contracts, like triage nurses with patient charts. Their faces had that tight, polite mask people where when they don't want to say out loud that something's wrong. My phone buzzed, a text from Kyle, one of the junior accountants I'd mentored back when he was still figuring out how to spell accrual. What did you send them? People looked scared. I stared at the message for a moment before replying, just the records they asked for. No emoji, no elaboration. If he wanted to connect the dots, he could. From my seat, I had a view straight down the corridor toward the executive suite. The CFO's office door was shut, but I could see shadows moving back and forth behind the frosted glass. Every so often, the door would crack open and someone would slip in, close it fast, and stay in there far longer than whatever they'd been carrying should have required. It was strange. I felt no triumph yet, no rush of victory. Just a detached curiosity, the same feeling I used to get watching weather radar before a storm. You see the green and yellow swirls tightening, the pressure dropping. You know something's going to hit. But it hasn't yet, and so you just watch. The extended audit meant they were digging. Legal pulling contracts meant they were worried about exposure. Maybe something in the file had matched to obligations they couldn't explain away. In this kind of situation, every page in a filing cabinet becomes a potential grenade. I logged out of my email for the day, still with hours left before my access was gone for good. The background hum of the office seemed sharper, like everyone was speaking in lowercase letters and avoiding eye contact. I walked past the conference room just long enough to glimpse the auditors, heads bent over my spreadsheet, pens tapping against paper. Not hurried, not confused, focused. Whatever they were piecing together in there, it was building into something bigger than anyone had expected, anyone except me. The crack appeared mid-morning the next day, sharp enough to echo through the whole building. Word moved fast. The CFO had just canceled an investor presentation that had been on the calendar for months. No explanation, no reschedule date, just a vague note from his assistant about urgent internal priorities. Around here, you didn't scrap an investor presentation unless something was seriously wrong. From my spot in the far corner of the open plan floor, I could see the ripple effect. The executive wing lit up like a control panel, phones ringing, assistants jogging between offices, half-closed doors that usually stayed wide open. People walked faster, carrying stacks of binders like they were shuttling classified documents. And that conference room where the auditors had been camped out, the blinds were drawn now. Not long after, my desk phone rang, an unfamiliar extension from the legal department. I let it go to voicemail, then checked the message, a clipped, polite voice identifying herself as corporate counsel, just hoping to get some context around the documents you provided to the external auditors. Context. I almost laughed. There was no context in my file. There was data, timestamps, and direct links to the regulations violated. Context was for spin doctors and storytellers. My job had always been the opposite. Still, I called back. Kept my tone even professional. Neutral, the file metadata should answer any questions about sources and dates, I said, Everything aligns with the official system records. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to picture her scrolling through the metadata, realizing every entry matched an internal document ID that could be pulled up and verified in seconds. No opinion, no personal notes, just a chain of facts that could walk themselves into a courtroom. She cleared her throat. Right, yes, I see, thank you. And then she hung up, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the call itself. I leaned back in my chair, watching the CFO's shadow pass behind his frosted glass door again. He'd been in that office almost nonstop since the cancellation notice went out, only leaving for brief trips down the hall to legal. I wondered if he'd seen the whole spreadsheet yet, or if he was still in the stage where you think you can cherry pick the easy issues and hope the rest doesn't surface. The thing about staying inside the lines, and I always had, is that it's impossible to fault you for following procedure. They could dig, they could frown, they could curse my name in closed-door meetings, but the truth was unshakable. The auditors asked for documentation, and I'd given them precisely that. And now, it seemed, the documentation was beginning to speak for itself. By the end of the week, the whispers weren't just about extended audits anymore. They had names, numbers, and stakes. A tax manager from the fourth floor passed me in the hallway and muttered under her breath, "They're saying some of this could be criminal." I didn't ask her to elaborate. I didn't need to. I'd built the file, I knew what was in it. The difference now was that people were realizing it wasn't just about civil fines or a slap on the wrist from regulators. Certain violations, the kind my boss liked to wave off as technicalities, had teeth, and those teeth could bite hard enough to leave actual prison time on the table for officers who had signed off on them. Personal liability. The phrase moves through an executive suite like a cold draft under a locked door. Bits of information trickled out from unexpected places. A friend in accounting told me legal had flagged at least 3 instances where control failures lined up with certification documents signed under penalty of perjury. Someone else mentioned the auditors had escalated parts of the review to their special investigations team, the kind of move that never happens unless they suspect intent, not just negligence. Meanwhile, the CFO's office had turned into a bunker. The blinds stayed shut all day. His light burned long after everyone else had gone home, visible from the parking lot like a signal fire. People noticed, and they noticed something else. Emails to him weren't being answered. Not ignored, not brushed off. Just nothing. Like the silence you get when someone's too busy rehearsing answers for a question they hope no one will ask. The shift in the office tone was almost surreal. 2 weeks earlier, I'd been the one on the outside, a soon-to-be ex-employee everyone assumed would quietly fade out. Now, I was still leaving, but the center of gravity had moved. The tension wasn't around my departure, it was around what I'd left behind. I'd expected some fallout when I sent the file, but the speed of it surprised me. I'd thought the auditors might spend weeks peeling through the details, slowly building a case. Instead, it seemed they'd taken one look and started pulling threads that unraveled faster than anyone was ready for. It was satisfying, yes, watching the arrogance that had dismissed me collapse into closed-door panic. But there was disbelief woven into it too, a kind of quiet astonishment at how quickly the balance shifted once facts had the floor. I'd spent 15 years sending warnings into the void. Now, the void was answering back, and it had subpoenas in its hand. The call came just after 8 in the evening, my phone buzzing against the kitchen counter while I was rinsing out a coffee mug I'd never have to bring to that office again. The display lit up with his name, not an assistant, not legal, not some nervous junior accountant, the CFO himself. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Hello?" His voice was lower than I'd ever heard it, stripped of the boardroom bravado and casual arrogance he'd worn like a tailored suit. "You've got a problem," he began. There was no preamble, no attempt at small talk, just the blunt weight of panic pressing through the line. I said nothing, letting the silence pull at him until he filled it. The auditor's findings, they've identified multiple violations. Not just compliance issues, criminal exposure. There's a 7-figure liability already on paper, and if this escalates, certain officers, myself included, could be facing personal charges. Breathing was uneven. I could hear the faint click of a pen in his hand, a nervous tick I'd seen in meetings when a question caught him off guard. "I just need to understand," he continued, his tone edging toward desperation. "Why did you?" I cut him off gently, my voice steady, almost calm. "You asked for documentation. I gave the auditors exactly what they requested." There was a pause, as if he was weighing how much of his remaining dignity to spend. "You know this could." "That's right," I said, not raising my voice, not rushing. "It could. And you know what you told me when you let me go?" He didn't answer. "You said, 'Don't get emotional, it's just business.'" The silence on the other end was absolute now, not the silence of a dropped call, but the kind that comes when there's nothing left to say that won't make things worse. I held it for a moment longer, then added, "Well, this is just business too." Before he could respond, I ended the call. I set the phone down, walked to the window, and looked out at the darkened street. The world outside was quiet, unaware of the storm rolling through those glass-walled offices. For the first time since this all began, I let the corners of my mouth lift into a small, private smile, the kind you keep for yourself when you know the balance sheet just closed exactly as it should. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.